we have now moved to item 15, page 5 of the late agenda, and I'm going to move from the chair, first of all, that the report be received as per page 5. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Seconded, Councillor Casson. I'm now going to hand over to the Chief Executive.
Excuse me, sorry. Yes, I'd like to ask the City Solicitor, it was as agreed in the public excluded session, that he would provide an outline of his advice and his interpretation of the Judge's decision in respective costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, and Mr. Chairman and Councillors, thank you. The way that I would approach this is to repeat some of what had been discussed earlier, and I'll do it this way. First of all, I wanted to make it very clear that the advice that I've given is purely objective legal advice on the merits of a costs application, regardless of the nature of the appellant. So this is purely an objective assessment of Council's prospects of success should a costs application be made in this case. The first critical point I want to make is that in terms of the way that the court will approach an award of costs in this case, this is an unusual case in the sense that while in most jurisdictions in New Zealand there's an expectation that costs follow the outcome of the case, in other words, the successful party can expect the unsuccessful party to pay a contribution to their costs. That same starting point assumption is not in existence in the Environment Court appeal process concerning district plan appeals such as this. And that is enshrined in the Environment Court's practice note of 2014, where it makes it very clear that for appeals concerning plan changes such as the Hamilton City District Plan Review, costs will not ordinarily be awarded regardless of the outcome. So the starting point is cost neutrality regardless of who won. There are, however, certain factors that the court will take into account in deciding whether to shift from that position of neutrality, and I just want to explore with you some of those factors. Simply put, if an applicant for a costs award was to convince the court that there was merit in awarding costs against a party, they would need to point to some action on behalf of the other party, such as being a vexatious litigant or an abuse of the court's process, or a poorly run case which has contributed to unnecessary costs being incurred. And it's only in those kinds of circumstances that you could expect an award of costs to be made in a plan change hearing such as this. So the question is whether those kinds of factors exist in the present case. Now, what I will say is that there is one criticism of the appellant identified at paragraph 31 of the judgment. It is a reasonably moderate criticism, but nevertheless it does make it clear that the court was critical of the appellant's changing position in terms of the relief sought, which continued to evolve up to and during the course of the hearing. So there is a criticism of that nature at paragraph 31 of the judgment. In my mind, that criticism does not amount to the kind of threshold that I've just described in terms of a vexatious litigant or an abuse of the court process, or a clearly poorly run case which has added unnecessary costs. But nevertheless, it's a criticism and it's a factor that would tend towards moving towards an award of costs. To counterbalance that, there are some factors here which go the other way and would strongly count against an award of costs. And the first is that this is correctly characterised as a case which involved matters of public interest. Although there was a private interest component in terms of the King Family Trust land in question, at the core of the case was a challenge laid down by the appellant in terms of the key policy positions that this council had taken in respect of its proposed district plan in response to a requirement to give effect to the regional policy statement. And a significant policy shift was made in this district plan, particularly around the controls and the allocation of commercial and retail land within the city. The fact that the case focused a challenge on those policies means that there was a very clear public policy component to the case and a public interest component to the case. That factor counts against an award of costs in favour of the successful party. And the reason for that is that the intention here is that plan making, district plan making, is a public participatory process, and that if every appellant that had an unsuccessful appeal in the Environment Court was exposed to significant costs awards, that would have a chilling effect on the level of public participation. The second factor which counts against making an application for costs is a very clear message contained within the judgment itself at paragraph 183, where the judgment and the judge uses the words, quote, "We do not encourage any application for costs," unquote. Those words mean exactly what they say, and in my view don't require any interpretation, except to say that what the court is signalling here is that if an application were made, it's unlikely to be successful. Finally, I would point out that in terms of the actual costs that will be expended by council in pursuing a costs application, there will need to be detailed written submissions prepared, and then it is likely that this application for costs will itself go to a defended hearing, which I imagine will take approximately a half day to dispose of. And the costs of preparing for the case, preparing the written submissions and arguing the case in the Environment Court could amount to between $20,000 and $30,000 for you to incur. Against that, it needs to be understood that if you are to be successful in a costs application of that nature, my estimate and the estimate of external counsel also is that you are not likely to get an award of costs beyond between $20,000 and $30,000 in any event. So in other words, you will probably spend the same or a similar amount in pursuing costs as you might be awarded if you were successful. And finally, in addition to that matter, I would say that that's if you are successful. There is always the prospect of being unsuccessful in your costs application, particularly in light of the language used in the judgment at paragraph 183, where the court discourages an application for costs. And like any application before the court, that of itself, if you are knocked back on your application, might mean that you expose counsel to your own application for costs against you. So for all of those reasons, on balance, when I evaluate the way that the court is likely to approach the question and the factors that I've just described, on balance, I do not recommend that you pursue the application.
Thank you, City Solicitor. So that was the advice we received in the public excluded, effectively almost verbatim, which is good. And based on that advice in public excluded, I'd like to also effect the resolution, which is to put in the open minutes that council voted on a motion to not pursue costs against the A&A King Trust, and that vote was passed unanimously by those councillors present. If that's noted in the minutes, thank you. Are there any questions to either myself, Lachlan, or the report, which is item number 15?
Councillor Mallett, sorry.
Will the actual vote and the wording of that resolution become public also, that we just passed?
That's correct.
Oh, that has become public.
That is
notice.
effectively
Okay,
becomes
thank you.
public.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Just not the impact, just the actual, okay.
Yep, that's correct.
Mr Chief Executive, it might be helpful if you perhaps explain the normal procedure when any council receives legal advice in terms of legal privilege.
Yep, so just to reiterate, I think we've still got a motion on the table to receive the report, which we haven't voted on yet, have we? Is that still outstanding?
That's correct.
That's correct. No, as I explained prior to going into public excluded, we, in all circumstances, it's our practice that we will take legal advice on any legal matter, particularly involving a case either against us or we're against another defendant, is to seek the legal advice in public excluded first, and that's to ensure that we have clear and unambiguous legal advice around our strategy prior to inform councillors, but also to ensure that we don't make our legal strategy publicly available to actually minimise our chances of success. So now that council has made a decision not to pursue costs, it's entirely relevant that we release that information as part of that decision to provide full context to the public of Hamilton.
Any further discussion? So basically what I would suggest, where we say that the report be received and we confirm that the resolution passed and confidential is released, and that the legal advice received from the city solicitor is also noted. So I'm just going to, with the leave of the seconder, suggest that that just be added to my motion from the chair. All right. So we're receiving this report, right?
Sorry, Mark, you want me to...
Well, no. I'm moving that not only are we receiving the report as per on page 5, you know, that's the public item on the agenda, we're also noting that we have released the resolution passed in the confidential section of the council meeting, and we're also formally noting the advice we have just received from our city solicitor. And I just, with the leave of my seconder, would you agree to that, Mr. Councillor Cassidy? Thank you. In terms of the motion in front of you, is there any discussion? I'm moving. So what I'm going to do is now I have, in terms of discussing the motion in front of us, Councillor O'Leary.
Oh, thank you. Look, I just want to acknowledge, firstly, the staff that have worked considerably, I don't know how many years, 3 years, Mr CE, on the district plan.
7
years.
I think it started 7 years ago.
7 years.
Shouldn't we be due for a plague now, shouldn't we? Locusts should come flying over.
You know, Luke, you have, this is it now, we're done and we're dusted, and you have lived and breathed this project for 7 years, and you and your team are to be congratulated, and I hope the CE does take you out for a well-earned beer. I don't know what you're going to do after this, perhaps have a well-deserved holiday, but seriously, it's, you know, I was there right at the beginning, and it's an overwhelming amount of work to put in a district plan. And I've also maintained from the beginning, actually, it feels like, because it's a city and it's growing very quickly and it's such a massive piece of work, you know, it's the rule book that governs our city. It feels like as we went along at every decision point, that as soon as we made that decision, it's possibly already out of date because it's been 7 years. So I guess I'm just paying some attention to the Mayor's request early on, even though I did vote against it. I get the intention of trying to fix some of those things. But sincerely, I've been here right from the start, so thank you and your team, and you've certainly earned a gold star. And I think it needs to be acknowledged also that Judge Harland, in her decision, acknowledged that and acknowledged the work and the connectedness of that work that you've done with significant regional partners, and I think that's pretty good as well. So you need to be you certainly deserve a gold star for this. In terms of the decision to not award costs, I thank our legal counsel for the very concise explanation on that, and like I think has been previously expressed, I've actually learnt something as well around the Environment Court and how, you know, I guess they're protecting the views and not the views, but the ability for any member of the public to be able to challenge public policy, and I think that that's significant and that's important. And I think, you know, we have made the right decision today based on legal advice, and we have been very consistent in following in my 9 years here on the excellent legal advice that we've been given. So thank you.
Councillor Bunting.
Thank you. I speak in support of the motion. I think also the staff and our legal advisors, and following on from what Councillor O'Leary said, this is the Environment Court, so this is a different kettle of fish. And I certainly don't support throwing good money after bad. I'd also like to signal that I seriously hope this is the end of this matter, and you know, I would hope and expect that the appellant doesn't appeal anymore, and this is the end of this, and we can get on with the job. Although I endorse what I've heard earlier on, this is a victory for rigorous public debate as well. So, you know, a big pat on the back to both of you guys, and I certainly hope this is the end of this matter now.
Councillor Pascoe.
Thank you. I would also like to acknowledge Councillor O'Leary's comments about the work that the staff have done in terms of making this new proposed district plan almost operative. I think the last district plan took 10 years from the time it was released to becoming a fully operative district plan. This one's taken 2 to go through all of those various stages of consultation, of expert peer review, of mediation and negotiation, with only 2 objections ending up in the Environment Court, and both of those objections were found to favour the proposed district plan. So I think we now have a good, stable district plan for going forward, and I look forward to the next step where the partly operative district plan becomes the operative district plan. Thank you.
Councillor Casson.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Council for concise guidance that he's given us today. All good. And like was alluded to before, when a judge gives you a strong indication as to how they see things, then it would be a little bit like an angry parent telling a kid, "Don't you dare." So it's one of those things, you know, it's one of the things you learn from policing for years, is if a judge gives you guidance on a certain subject, you should take it.
Councillor Mallett.
Not wishing to rain on anyone's parade, but the reality is that district plans never stop. The reality is we're already talking about changing our district plan with these housing accords. So the reality is a district plan is out of date the day it's received. And just get used to it. Honestly, you will never. Hey, look, that's why you got such great job security. We'll never stop doing it. You don't even have to get re-elected every 3 years, mate. You just rolls on. No, it won't. It won't change. It'll just, you know, there'll be challenges to the district plan because, and getting political here, we think we know where things should be, and the market doesn't think that's where they should be, and there'll be a build-up of people who disagree such that the noise becomes so loud that we'll have to make changes. And already we've signalled that we're going to make changes to our district plan by way of those housing accord things we were talking about earlier on. So it never stops. It never ever stops.
Councillor Henry.
I just want to add one more thing, and just what you said, I think, thank goodness, nothing. There's always changes in life, and whether we like it or not, we just have to live with that. The other thing I just want to say is being able to challenge that through the Environment Court, and not having to, not knowing that you might not have to foot the cost even if you lose is quite heartening, because sometimes we have to challenge things. We just can't always go with the status quo because it might be in the wrong place. So that's a great thing that I learned today. So thank you for that. And I'm excited for changes. I think, well, why nobody needs us if there's no change. So.
Any further speakers? I'm going to avoid any temptation for a sum up, except just to thank staff and to also acknowledge that a robust process around the district plan that actually guarantees in our democracy the right of people to have their day in court. And I just want to acknowledge the advice we've received and the professionalism of the whole team. And Councillor Mallet, I acknowledge, has a strong degree of truth. District plans, as we know, never stop. But without further ado, thank you very much. And I am now going to put the motion as in front of you. All those in favour of the motion, we'll go to the voting board. All those in favour, just or against?
The motion is carried unanimously.